So we're still trying to pay tribute to former President JJ Rawlings by understanding his evolution. And one of the things we want to do today is to find out people who were around the revolution, late 70s, early 80s, all the way into the mid-90s, because we know there was AFRC Rawlings, there was PNDC Rawlings, and there was also NDC Rawlings. Now, I'm here with Winfred Osei, very interesting man. He's a cadre. He was, some people consider the first deputy propaganda secretary of NDC many years ago. These days he's into business, but he has a bit of the Rawlings story to tell us. Mr. Osei, thanks for joining us on The Point of View.
Thank you, Bernard.
So we're trying to, of course, commiserate and remember Rawlings. So first, of course, condolences, because I know you are part of the founding group of people who were around him. What are your opening thoughts about the life and the legacy of Rawlings?
Rawlings, my leader, my inspirer, may he rest in peace, and my condolences to the family. My engagements with Rawlings, and for that matter, the revolution, will be most understood if I give you a little bit of background. I became politically active at a much early age. My father was an NP during '69. He contested on the NAL tickets. Okay, so I had at that time I was about 11 years. So I saw what happened then, and I followed with keen interest. Very, very inquisitive young boy then. Then probably Adisadel College also, contributed. I went to Adisadel. I entered Adisadel College in 1992. In 1972, my father then had been overthrown by Kutu Achiampong. That was the very year I went to Form 1. And then you had the likes of Mr. Kojo Yanka, on campus. He was our literature master, and he was full of progressive politics. Then those were the liberation days, Pan-Africanism, so we belonged to Gonsai and all that. So I took interest in some of those clubs. And then by '75, the serious problems in the political setup have started showing in the national milieu. And you had, the students up in arms against Achiampong, workers up in arms against Achiampong. Then Achiampong also then came in with the Unigov. And Unigov was not that popular, so the students organized, workers mobilized. And then also you had a movement for freedom and justice. Those were the days when the state's media was controlled. So you had Ashanti Pioneer, Catholic Standard, and a few other newspapers that were giving the other side of things in Ghana. So I took keen interest. I finished at the Form 5. I decided to work a bit. Then by '78, the union government thing happened, and we, the youth were very much against the Unigov, in tandem with the NUCs and other students. The students had gone on demonstration and just been sacked, so we had the opportunity to join hands with our colleagues in the universities to go to the villages and campaign for no. So it was in that context that my political vision got sharpened. Okay, and I took interest in what was happening. There and then, the coup happened. Then, Ghana when the first coup happened, that is Akufo overthrowing Achiampong, and then Achiampong, and then Akufo also deciding to hand over the country to constitutional rule, back to constitutional democracy. And then, in the midst of that, one fine day we heard about, that is May 15, about a young soldier who had led a few of his colleagues, in a protest of a kind, and it caught our attention. Okay. Then, during the trial, the was it graphic? Times published excerpts of his speech that he meant to deliver if he had been successful. And it really, shook us. It woke us up. And he really came up as somebody who really represented what the youth and then this nation really needed at that time. Because by that time, the economy was really in tatters. We didn't have an economy. It is amusing when you hear current governments and their leaders say that they came and made the coffers of this country broke. By the time Rawlings came, there was no economy.
There was no economy?
There was no economy because, we didn't have even imports. We didn't have foreign exchange to even import items. The shelves were depleted, were empty. We couldn't get. Then the term essential commodities became a terminology, and it came into our language mix. We didn't have that in the 60s and all that, but essential commodities because it was very scarce. It was very difficult to get milk, sardine, soap, and things like that. So where were you going to get the excise?
So what I want to understand is, so what was the message Mr. Rawlings brought in '79, which made you and a lot of people support it?
You see, the army had then managed the country for some time after they overthrew the NDC. And, they were responsible for this mismanagement that led to these shortages. Factories were not running. That time, the economy was mainly state-controlled, and we had a lot of state enterprises. And they formed the basis of industry and employment, mostly. And they were running at very, very, very low levels. And therefore, production was low. Salaries couldn't therefore be paid. We had to reschedule salary payments and other things. So there was difficulties all over, hardship, and the youth started leaving the country. So when he came, he blamed the military authorities and also foreign elements who were then dominating the trade and commerce in this country. Being a young soldier, that was his, And then also, he was able to identify that the military people were doing that in concert with their colleagues, elites in the civil and public life. And therefore, he felt that there was a need to deal with that. Like he called it a rot in the society. So he called for a cleanup. He said he was coming to clean up the country and reset more or less so that we can reset our nation on a better path of reconstruction. So that was, in summary, the message that we got. And it fired a lot of us up. So we supported him. I remember by '79, by the time he came, I had then started work at Ghana Sugar Estates. I was a young activist then. I was in the union then. So everywhere in Ghana, in response to the Rawlings call, people started calling for the states or the government, his government, to come and look into the situation in their area of life. Almost every workplace wanted some kind of probe to happen in their companies. Every community that had some issues wanted the AIFRC to do something about the challenges that they were doing. So I remember we in Gasel, that's Ghana Sugar Estates Limited, the sugar factory in Nkrumah. They're very huge, beautiful complex of industry that we are allowed to fail. We wrote, like many other workers' organizations, wrote to the AIFRC Secretariat. And they also gave a timeline of only 3 months. So they didn't have enough time to go all over. So they did what they could do. I think that they went for the low-hanging fruits, mainly in Accra. And Asrari was then near Bong and Akuse, and then also we had a commander, another branching commander, and there were a lot of other companies in the western region, Obuasi area, in Kumasi, and that wanted, some kind of focus, because all the industries were ailing, and there was a crisis, a national crisis. Mm-hmm. So he came, he couldn't finish the work, but we were fired up. He handed over, Lima took over. But clearly, the nation was not ready for the work as usual. Okay? But they came to continue the status quo, the typical, politics that we saw in the 69, 79 that Achampong came to overthrow. And it wasn't responding enough. So when Rawlings handed over, a lot of the youth, formed groups in response to the June 4th movement. He and some of the senior cadres or people who were with him formed the June 4th movement to sustain the ideals of what they wanted to do. And we responded in the eastern region. I was then in the Somanya Odumasere Club with some of student leaders. We formed a branch of the. So Rawlings was then going around, inaugurating and talking to people. And that was when he was being harassed. They were following him and all that. So I remember my first engagement with him was when we held one of these symposia. And at the Manyakrubu District Assembly, then it was District Council. And he came with Captain Chikata. It was quite a motley assembly. The youth, the chiefs were there, even some of the current political leaders were there, and the whole place was full. So he came and spoke. Okay. Then during the edition, he stopped and he called Captain to come. And he asked, how many of us know this man? His name is Captain Chikata. The place was quiet. But because I had read a lot in those days, I told you during the school days, I took interest. I knew a little bit about him. So I raised my hand. And I said, oh, yes, I know about him. I've read that he fought in Angola and was part of the internationalist movement or something like that, to that effect. And John Rawlings nodded his head. So immediately after the thing, he pulled me aside. And as when he told him that we have to get in touch. So that was my first.
That's how you got directly involved. So what were the so-called PDCs and the WDCs? What were those things?
So let me come. Okay. So that was the setting. Then 31st happened. So when 31st happened, he said he's asking for a revolution. He started a house cleaning. He didn't, and he called on people to question the status quo. So that agenda, that fire he lit in people to question what was happening, and the desire, that the way it resounded well with people, and the desire by the youth and then working people to have their areas really probed, and some of the ills in their distance dealt with or sorted out, made a lot of people respond. So at that time, it was like, I'm calling on all of you to question the status quo. And Ghanaians were fed up with the status quo. And they wanted it to be dealt with. So in all areas of national life, people rose up, people got and organized. The workers organized in their workplaces. One of the first declarations that he came out with was the INCC, Interim National Coordinating Committee of the PDCs. And he said, look, let's have defense committees in all your villages, in your communities, form groups. At your workplaces, he's calling on workers to form groups. Two main things. Question the system. Take your destiny into your own hands. And let's chart a new path forward. He talked about self-reliance. He talked about taking care of ourselves and not waiting for government. And helping together to reconstruct this country. And you see, and it reflected and connected very well with the people. Well, people were having issues. Is the point. So, and then there were difficulties nationally that you required a certain level of cohesion around, a certain agenda to deal with it. It could not have been done on the altar of this multi-democratic system where you had opposition and all that. The whole nation needed to be relevant. And then we all saw the problem, and we saw him as somebody who really had what it takes.
Some people say to me that these CDRs were like agents which were reporting people. So they were like spies for the government. So if, for example, there's a CDR in a place, then they can say, oh, this person, he started making money, so come and investigate him. Is that correct? Is that what they were doing?
You see, it was a natural consequence, because let me explain what had really happened. The CDRs, or first of all, we started as PDCs. They were a response to what was happening in the environment. So there were issues about cheating, misuse, mismanagement. There were issues about bullying by, and oppression and all those things. So they were the people who organized the community to rise up against such systems. So naturally, they became, a center of action to deal with anything that anybody considered, wrong in the community. So if somebody, is trying to cheat you over your property, or he's taking your money, doesn't want to pay, or various things, the CDRs were the first point of call. When bridges were broken, when people didn't have access to medicine, and there was the need to mobilize people to build hospitals and that kind of, they were the people who were.
Is that what later became the cadres?
Yes. So they became the cadres. And you see, the difficulty of the time, it is important we understood that. Jerry had just come and has called for a mass response. A lot of people came up from various backgrounds. Even their understanding as to what really this assignment was varied. Is the point. So it was then that you needed to harmonize thought and action. Is the point. But from the onset, people have come onto the bag with all kinds of ideas. Is the point. At the workplaces, which were more organized, it was much more easy. But again, you see, I've told you that the economic malaise in existing was as a result of mismanagement by managers and people in business at the helm of trade and all that. With their colleagues from the military. So at every workplace, the workers also rose up to deal with some of these things. They wanted, and then he also called for a participation in the decision making. Is the point. So the PDCs were not just people to just intervene in other people's. They were to mobilize the people and enable them to also interrogate issues and proffer their ideas and solutions. So it was a means of organizing the people to be part of the decision making, both at the workplace and
so we've seen an evolution of that whole thing. AFRC, PNDC, now you have NDC. We are told that even PNDC had a lot of UP elements, Obeda Samoa and Co, even Kufu at some point. Clearly you were part of the people who are the socialists in the group. So what accounted for that shift to bring in more right-leaning elements into the revolution?
You see, naturally, the status quo was being perpetuated by, a certain mix of situation. The world order, private business, we call it the multinational corporations and all that, and also the elites in society, they were, so naturally the first rhetoric that came was much more, anti-imperialist. Okay, because VACO, things like VACO, the situation in VACO where they were taking out, how they call it, hydropower for pittance and all those things, came back. The issue about Ashanti Gold and, how our cocoa had been neglected and all those things. And you could see the hand of the foreign companies and all that. So the rhetoric was anti-imperialist, then also anti the elite in society. Okay, and that was also very important because it enabled the ruled or the oppressed to rise up and supported the DC. That helped also had a consolidation factor. So it helped consolidate the process in such a way that, there were so many attempts against the system. There were also a lot of applause from the Western countries, but because of the sheer support base, which the workers especially represented, the workers that people like me led from Tema, at the press of a button, we could put about 500 busloads of people from Tema and Accra on the streets of Accra. We attempted taking over the US embassy. We were stopped by things like that. So if even you thought about dealing with Rawlings and the revolution, you had this mass base behind. So it helped consolidate this thing. That was the rhetoric. But after dealing with the issues about the immediate issues about social justice and things at the workplace and all that, the institutions, the practices in the workplaces that had created this kind of oppressive environment, after dealing with them, there was the issue about national reconstruction. And then you know very well that just around this thing, there were a whole lot of other external factors. One, the return of the stacking of about 2 million Ghanaians from Nigeria. The sanctions were applied on this country. Ghana couldn't pay oil supplies to Nigeria. I think that Nigerians did, and then they withdrew the supplies in solidarity with their colleagues who were overthrown. You had bushfires, droughts in this country then. It's really aggravated the situation. And the leadership was under pressure. You see, and it is just fortunate that we have somebody like Rawlings. You needed somebody that could galvanize the country through these hard times. One, like I told you, there was no economy. Even lorry ties, nothing was on display. So even rice, we were short of rice and everything. Piracy, those were the days when piracy showed its face. Not external, internal piracy. The boys of Atema Newtown, they went ship loads and other things, they feel this, they will rush with boats and attack the ship and steal rice because they needed to survive. Most companies were operating at 10-15%. In that kind of situation, you needed to engage the people to sacrifice. One of the things that WDC did, and which is important was able to support the government through those times. Because you had a situation where, the coffers were empty, even salary increases were then scheduled about 2-3 years, and then we were in the turn of a moment when we had to increase salaries in Ghana, and there was no money. So can you believe that Kwesi Botwe and some members of the PNs had to meet us at Cocoa Products? Then the Workers' Defense Committee met once every week, Wednesdays at the Cocoa Products, their conference room there. And it was there and then. Having explained the exigencies of the situation, the workers agreed with the workers' leaders. It wasn't any government policy, agreed to a salary freeze for about 2-3 years to give the government space to be able to stabilize the economy.
Okay, let's
now back to your question. So first you started like that, but when it came to the real issues about the economy, you also had a situation where, you had to sit down and reflect. Having reflected, there were certain emissaries to the Eastern world, to see if we could get some support. It wasn't coming as we thought. And you know, that's the thing about Rawlings and his suitability for the times. He wasn't the kind of ideologue. I say that he's a dogmatic ideologue or that. No, Rawlings was a pragmatist. He wanted what will work for this country. If it's from the west, if it's from the east, he will take it. Okay. So at that particular, he said, hey, wait a minute. Let us sit down and be real. And it sounded as if at that time we could get some space dealing with the IMF. But the IMF, as you know, will always come with certain conditionalities. So that was when there has to be some management, some climb down. Okay. And then also you needed a very national, as part of the consolidation, you needed a certain national, cohesion. And the PNDC reflected that in the first appointment that he did to the, and it made sure that it was non-partisan. It appealed to Ghanaians, and anybody who was willing and able and wanted to contribute, join hands with him, you were welcome.
All right.
So that was how come some of his people made contact to there were a lot of consultations, and some of them were willing. Like the Kufuors, like Obeda Samwas, like Idris Umaman, who were of the Busia Dankwa tradition. There is the Techiman lawyer, who was the first co-chairman, Unifi and others.
Okay.
Okay. So, and Jerry was smart in that he didn't come to do a CPP thing. He didn't come to do he wanted.
All right. I just want my final point to you. So what is his biggest legacy?
Okay. Rawlings' legacies are very varied. You see, Rawlings was, in a way, it might sound controversial, but he unified the people of this country who genuinely wanted to develop. Clearly, there were people who were benefiting from the status quo, and therefore, it was very difficult for those people to work with him. But as long as you didn't belong to that, he was very open, and that's how come you realize that he worked with people from all persuasions. So in that respect, he was a unifier. He was also a disciplinarian. He didn't believe in, blind loyalty. He works with you. If you go wrong, he will deal with you. That's how come people like his nephew fell foul and he paid the capital price. His close friend, Atachimo, and most of his appointees. I can tell you that even our tenure of office, myself and who were in charge of the first coordinating committee of the PDCs in Tema, he got us investigated when he heard certain things. And he investigated and he found out that those things were known. So Rawlings will always come to ask for probity and accountability. He gave people the chance to express themselves. If there were times I was speaking about how he got me on earth and how we work together and the kind of things that Now, I think that a few things need to be put out. Rawlings was a type that had, a down up approach and then a top bottom up approach, and he had information from both ends. So you couldn't play around with him. His ministers that he, appointed were always on the tenterhooks because it isn't what you said alone. For whatever you say, he has about 2 other sources to cross-check. So you had you could see the ministers, the DCEs, those are district secretaries. You had the regional ministers, or regional secretaries, and then the people in charge of the ministries. That was one line. But you had the ACDRs from the ground. They also had a similar thing. Then he has his personal, For instance, there was a time when, TDC had issues with the tenants. Nkrumah built the tenant house, he gave it to TDC. TDC was taking care of it. TDC sold, and then it was a subvented organization. and the internal generated IGR wasn't enough. So having sold about 50% of the this and having just about half of the stock, they had to always, increase the rents of the tenants anytime they needed more money. And it was creating a problem. Can you believe that I approached Rawlings on this? I told him that it wasn't fair. And that it got to a point where, the poor workers in Tema were being harassed and they were even being dispossessed. Mind you, earlier on he had brought in the one man, one house as part of his social justice mantra, so that all state houses, anybody could not take more than one. And that time we had this thing called institutional houses that were being abused. So through the institutional houses, I can form a company and my company can go and take about 20 and say that it's for my company and workers. So you had a situation where, this thing was happening. And CDC was putting all its budget on those few houses that were left. So the tenants came to me and I went to him and said that we couldn't sustain this thing because it was unfair. CDC has sold all the this and the rich people have bought the houses and then the few people who are salary, they are bearing bearing all the burden of TDC. They said, okay, so what do we do? And I told him that I thought that we should sell the houses to the workers. He said, but they don't have money. I said, yes, let us subsidize. Take about 50%. He said, okay, call Dan. Then he said he would call Dan. He called down and asked Dan, myself, and and we met in Tama with Aibunti. And that decision was taken. And today, because of that, a lot of ordinary people own it. So he was that type. This policy didn't come from a minister. It came from the ground. I can give you many examples.
So he was both connected upwards and downwards.
Yes, and his policy and his management style, reflected and a lot of things that he did was as a result of some of these ideas from the grassroots and I can give you, for instance, today the only shares that Ghana has in cement works, was as a result of a certain, when Ghana was divesting its shares in most of the companies. Gasem was previously 80% owned by government of Ghana and 20%, but gradually the shares, and it was almost, they were going to sell everything. Then the workers of Gasem had then, built up some reserves of their provident fund. So again, I approached him, told him that, say, can't you assist us to also buy some of the shares? And he said that would be a brilliant idea because this is something that he wanted to do for the ordinary people to own. It's okay. How do we do it? Then he said yes. He would call Larry Ajete. They had Law Trust, an investment firm, to work with us. So I went and saw Larry. They valued the shares there. They got one investment. They valued the shares there, and our money was short. We then had about those days about 400,000-500,000. I'm talking about mid-90s. But then when they did the value of the shares was about 1 point something. So we couldn't put up the DC. So I went back to Rawlings and said, no, the state will have to subsidize that. So he took off the DC and gave instruction that the shares must be sold to do. You know what? The 5% shares that Ghana has today, the workers held it for about 10 years. From that low value, the shares appreciated to over $5 million. Then Kufuor comes in, and the workers said that they wanted to offload the shares, and Kufuor said, I'll buy. And Kufuor bought those 5 shares.
For the state?
For the state, So that was Rawlings for you. It wasn't just top and what and I can give you hundreds of some of these, examples.
Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge of the man with us. Once again, condolences to you and all those who have been associated with him. Thank you for talking to us. We're speaking to Winfred Osei, who's one of the people who worked with Rawlings from the early days, reflecting on the man's life and legacy. We'll be right back.